Greetings, YouTube. I've lived in my town for 51 years. That's unusual. Most Americans don't tend to stay in one spot that long. We're a mobile folk, but I have. I've been here 51 years. Not my entire life. I'm 56, but I've been here for a really long time. And I've seen quite a few changes over those years. And one of the biggest changes is the main drag of my street, Elm Street, has significantly changed over the course of my life. At one time, it had dead ends at both ends, so it was the only main street in America that had dead ends. Now one end is no longer dead. It was the widest main street at one time. I don't know if it still is. Um, and there was a diversity of commercial uh, businesses open in the downtown area. Now it's almost all entertainment of some variety, foods or things like that, pubs, things like along those lines. There aren't as many brick and mortar stores dealing in commerce. Two of the places I loved when I was a kid, though, were Toyland, which was a classic small town, small toy store, not a chain. It was a single owner toy store, and it was very, very classic. And I can remember I bought my first RPG at that store. It was the first edition boxed set of Gamma World. I still own it. But there was also another store that was further down the street, and what I think at one time may have been some part of the mill system, because they were low one-story brick buildings that were very reminiscent of how the mills were made. So I'm not sure what they were originally. I really don't. And there were this long contiguous building that went like multiple blocks. It has since been broken up over the years. And there was the strip on Elm Street, and then there was a not kind of an alley, but a back street that was between the building and a cemetery. And it was in that back street where there were some businesses that were off the beaten path, literally off the beaten path. They were not noticeable from the main strip. And if you didn't know they were there, you might not even be aware that there were businesses on that thing. It's a one-way street, so you could very easily go down that and not pay attention to anything that's back there. And one of the stores that was back there, the entrance to this store, was the 606 Hobby Store. Now, if you walked in the 606 Hobby Store, because it was the address 606, if you walked in there, on your left was a fairly conventional toy shop. But if you walked up, you had to walk upstairs. It was very, very accessibility challenge. It was horrible to get into. But you walked up those stairs, and you went to your left again, toy store. But if you went to your right, there was an archway. And right at that archway, and then past that archway, that was the hobby section. And if you were a hobbyist of any kind, this was your nirvana. Into trains, they got you covered. Into miniature battles, Napoleonic, medieval, Civil War, they got you covered. Into anything RC, they got you covered. Into rocketry, everything you could possibly want. What got me all excited were the models. See, I used to be into model before I was into RPGs. And I had a few cars because my uncle owned a garage, and there was kind of cars in our blood, I guess, in the family. But for me, I loved the dioramas of like the Universal monsters, and there were some prehistoric dioramas. I can remember a caveman with a saber-toothed cat. Remember that very clearly in my mind. In fact, the toy spear that came with that caveman may have been the original inspiration for my love of weapons. I just loved that thing. That spear was so cool. And a lot of the Universal Monster dioramas had glow-in-the-dark bits. So if you turn the lights off in my bedroom, there's this little glow-in-the-dark stuff everywhere. But what I loved the most of all were spaceships. And I owned the Space 1999 vehicle. I owned the shuttle from 2001. I owned two of the fighters from Battlestar Galactica. I owned the original Star Trek shuttle. I owned the Enterprise. I owned one of the Klingon warbirds. Of course, I had a lunar module, as well as a Lego lunar module, because I loved Legos as well. I owned the original lunar module that's long gone. And I just loved these things. I wasn't great at building models. I really wasn't. But I still enjoyed doing it. And I only ever did one scratch-built model, and that was I modified. It wasn't even scratch-built. It was more of a modification of the original Star Trek shuttle to make it more of a combat model. I just kind of put some weapons and things on it from some plane models that I had that I just wasn't really into planes. So I think some family member tried to get me into planes, and I just never was never my thing. So I try to use bits of those and kind of turn them into a more of a combat thing, and I thought that was kind of cool. And maybe if I'd never discovered RPGs, maybe I would have gone down that route and become a more accomplished model builder. I did have pretty decent hand-eye coordination, and eventually I went into sketching, and then now that I have a place to do shop work and everything, my own property and stuff, now I have a shop and I build real weapons. I design and construct real weapons. So maybe I would be a model builder in a much bigger way than I was then. Maybe I would have gotten good. Maybe I would have been good enough to like be a member of some boards or something. But I did a little bit of research on the 606 hobby store, and I couldn't find much information on it about online. I did find an obituary of a woman who apparently worked there at one time, but she actually moved to Maryland. Her announcement was made because of the reference to this toy store, the hobby store in Manchester. And I did find a posting on an RC board because people were talking about like favorite hobby stores, and some of them was nostalgic. Someone like talking about hobby stores in the past that are now gone, and they brought up that one because it was a great hobby store. It really was. And one of the things I realized as I began to think about making this video is that they did carry RPG stuff. Okay, in fact, a fairly decent sized selection of it. It was in the transition zone between the toys and the hobby. And now that I think about it, that makes perfect sense. Because even at that time, RPGs, didn't know where they were. There wasn't the board game community that we have now. And there wasn't the gaming community. There was no computer games, really. I mean, unless you were on a college campus and had access to a mainframe. So yeah, it was a great hobby store. I loved the place. I miss it. Maybe I just miss the memory of it. I don't know. I don't really have a use for it anymore. But yeah, that was a place I spent a whole lot of time in as a kid. I was there every damn week. I loved that place. And I will have that memory forever.